Welcome to the Art of Adventure podcast. This is episode 217 with Antesa Jensen. The Art of Adventure is the podcast that helps you travel the world, run your business, and maximize your human potential. I'm your host, lead explorer, and guide, Derek Loudermilk. You can find the show notes over at derekloudermilk.com and a bunch of other information, including our adventure trips and superconductors, the book that I wrote, which is coming out July 3rd. And just wanted to share some of the testimonials, some of the reviews that are coming in. So one of them is from Tom Herr, who's an educational thought leader, PhD, founder of the New City School in St. Louis. And he says, Derek's book, Superconductors, is a treat to read. Derek is a student of life who shares his learning from books, people, and myriad experiences in a way that is entertaining and instructive. All leaders, current and aspiring, who read this book will come away with inspiration and ideas. So I'm super stoked that this book is actually turning out to be good and helpful, and would love for you to grab a copy. You can pre-order it. You can get it when it comes out. And if we ever meet, I'll sign it for you. I'm really excited. This book is full of information and practical advice and several stories from the adventures that I've been on to inform. So really excited about that. Superconductors out July 3rd. Now, on to today's episode. Antesa Jensen is my guest, and she is a coach and an emotional intelligence expert who runs adventure retreats, which are somewhat similar to Adventure Quest. And we were introduced by our mutual friend. And after we talked for the first time, I knew I wanted to get her on the show because she talks about the value of travel and adventure from a unique perspective. And she explains what we get out of travel and adventure in a way that I've never heard anyone articulate before, even among the hundreds of travelers that have been on this podcast. So her way of thinking is so unique and really valuable. And she's really well trained as a coach and in emotional intelligence. So she's got this great background that she brings to our interview. So one example that she tells us is actually the story of how she got started with this incident at a bus station in South America where she just got super angry and it came from nowhere, and she basically lost her cool for years and lost her voice for years. And this journey of becoming this coach that she has become to also help people work through and give them tools that they may never otherwise acquire. So how does that all fit in with her adventure trips? She talks about how she coaches people before, during, and after the adventure trips, and what's happening on these adventure trips when she brings a group of women together to all experience some country, some like Iceland or wherever she's taking them, and how they are all reflecting things for each other and all learning from each other and the landscape and the culture. So very fascinating how she approaches these adventure trips. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. She's a fascinating speaker and great guest. So here is Antesa Jensen. Welcome back to the Art of Adventure. I'm here today with Antesa Jensen. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you.
And let's see, how did we get connected? We got connected through Hallie Bass, one of my coaching peers. And you and I have a bit in common. You run Adventure Awake Adventure Trips, and you're a coach. And I've got Adventure Quest, and I'm a coach. So we have some things in common, but I really wanted to get you on the show after our initial talk because the way that you think about travel is different from almost everybody that I talk to, even experienced travelers or other coaches. And travel is a great tool for people to use for personal growth and development, but I've never heard you never heard anyone explain it the way that you do. So let's start by talking about the idea of Adventure Awake, where you taking people on these trips. Where did that come from, and what is the intention? What is the purpose of these trips?
Okay, so where Adventure Awake came from, I would say it's fairly deeply rooted in my own experience. I was a world traveler, spent the majority of my 20s and early 30s doing, solo journeying around the world, going to sort of more and more extreme places, putting myself in sort of more far off the beaten path, intrepid locations where there wasn't that much infrastructure, as a means to sort of feel my global citizenship, I would say. There was an element of escape to my experience as well. I was working in a financial institution for 12 years and had, being in Copenhagen, I had 7 weeks of vacation. And so I was traveling a lot and had started to feel a pretty large disparity between my travel self and my at-home self. I guess you could call it my real life self. I felt very at home in my body and knowing who I was when I was on the road. And then I would get home and it kind of felt like walking back into a prison cell, not really understanding what was going on. And that really started to happen when I was in South America. I had kind of an existential crisis in a bus station that didn't go well. I didn't understand what was going on. It was a life-threatening situation as far as I was concerned. I was quite worried about my safety and kind of lost my marbles a little bit. Like I got really, really angry in public, and then I didn't really know what to do with myself because I'd never really experienced that part of me before, and it sort of conflicted with my view of who I was as a human being. And the result was that I got pretty lost after that, and that is ultimately what ended up sending me to get training as a coach. I was, interested in acquiring tools to integrate some of these experiences into my life so that I could understand them better. And through that process, I, woke up one morning with a vision for Adventure Awake, realizing that I wouldn't have spent sort of 2 years feeling lost, volatile, out of control, and having no idea how to find my purpose in my life that I'd felt like I had veered far away from, had I had a coach with me on that journey to really help me integrate what was going on. What had happened that I didn't understand then was that I had gotten really deeply triggered. And, when your sense of safety is triggered, we have various ways of responding to it. We react. We either fight, we fly away, we escape, or we freeze, or we disassociate, or something. And often what we do is we will internalize the experience. It can have a detrimental effect on us physically. And I just didn't understand how any of that worked until I started getting training as a coach and gained some awareness around that. And so, I woke up one day and I kind of got a download of this business plan. It kind of felt like a divine experience. It came even with the title of the company, and sort of as a mission to serve those who have always wanted some sort of or expected some sort of transformational experience with their travel, have always sort of expected to come home completely changed and instead come home feeling a little bit fragmented. For people like me, I'm a seeker. I always have been. I have always been sort of a higher performer. I like the thrill of doing sort of wild things. I consider myself to be a primal woman in that way. And I think that when you are working on those edges and walking on those edges, it's valuable to have another person there to help you integrate your experience when it's at its most potent, which is while you're on your trip and shortly thereafter. And what you and I talked about that I think is the most compelling piece is that when you're on the road, when you're traveling, just the sheer nature of your being exposed to novelty, being exposed to new experiences, you have access to parts of your brain that are normally shut off. We habitually, as human beings, set up our typical lives to have a sense of security, stability, comfort. And so when we remove ourselves from that comfort zone and we go into environments that are new and different for us, we're presented with an option to either embrace that environment or reject that environment. And by the nature of embracing the experience that we're having is true and real, we open our minds up to alternative perspectives besides the limiting ones that we typically are functioning under at home. And when we do that consciously, when we're aware of our ability to do that, usually by having a coach debrief that experience for you or whatever it is, you then can go home and have the same experience at home with your emotional experience or with your sort of spiritual experiences. You may feel stuck, you may feel trapped in some way, and it's no longer either or, it's yes and you end up with a plethora of different perspectives that you could possibly see yourself in, and all of a sudden you've got access to abundance, you've got access to options, you no longer feel like you're thwarted in one choice, you have multiple. And that's just barely scratching the surface of what happens, but so long as you are accepting your reality is true, that becomes available to you. So I can give a brief example.
Yeah.
I was in Greenland in February with Adventure Awake, and you walk down the street, and at any given moment, 8-week-old Greenlandic puppy might run up and try to snuggle you, and they're adorable. And then you look down at the end of the street, and there's a skyscraper-sized glacier just like nonchalantly perched there at the end of the street corner, and you're just kind of like, it looks like it's surreal. It looks like something you would dream. The sensations are different. Your snot is freezing in your nostrils. It's so cold outside. The snow sounds different when your feet are crunching over it. And when you are conscious to that experience and you say, wow, this is real life. Like, this is what I'm experiencing is real. People live here. I can have human connection here. It serves as a sort of a dimension to a new portal of consciousness. Or a portal to a new dimension of consciousness is actually what I wanted to say there. Hello. Where you get access to parts of your mind that are normally sort of hibernating. It kind of is like doing drugs. It's like the closest thing I could equate to it. And what I was saying to you before, which I think is relevant, is that as you go to places that are more and more unfamiliar, the risk in not having a process of debrief and a process of integration of those experiences is that you end up with almost like islands of consciousness amidst what I call the shadow of your consciousness. So basically the unconscious things in your life. And what purpose the coach specifically serves is for the embodiment and the integration of those experiences. So how do they relate to your life? How is this experience something that you have created as a reflection of the part of yourself that you don't see? Really having profound conversations around how, while this reality is unfamiliar to you, you as a 100% in agency human being have created this as a reflection for you about who you are. And so travel then moves from a space of escape and, superficial discovery and experience to a true consciousness journey and shadow work. You really start to go into the depths of the expanses of your unconscious mind, discover along the way what you believe about yourself in those experiences and what you say to you, because you have a certain level of clarity without the obstruction of your view of normal comforts in life. And then you really get to discover who you are. So it ends up becoming a very, very profound experience of self-discovery. And I think that's ultimately what people are looking for when they go traveling. And usually it's just barely missed. It's kind of the thing that people think that they're after and try to find, but are kind of missing that final piece of like, how do I relate this to my life?
Is it possible to do that without a coach? Like if you're just a solo traveler without someone to debrief there for you?
I'm going to be super radical and say no, and here's why. Inevitably, and this is just as true for me as an enlightened coach as it is for you as an enlightened coach as it is for someone who's never been coached before, we all have blind spots. All of us. We have our known knowns, we have our unknown knowns, we have our known unknowns, and we have our unknown unknowns. And you've heard about this. This is the Johari window. It's a fairly common psychological model to like learn how to expand what we know. And inevitably, like one of the reasons I just attended an emotional intelligence course for 4 months as a student. I was by and large the most trained student in the room. I had done years of personal growth work, and there was infinite amount of content for me to grow in that program, because there inevitably is going to be a reflection that I'm going to get from someone else that I can't see myself. And our journey on the learning path doesn't ever truly end. And you can't really rely on yourself in that way, because yes, we see ourselves in the mirror and we definitely have some level of self-recognition, a basis of self-worth. But to separate ourselves from the reflection of other human beings actually stunts our growth. And usually when we're traveling alone, I've heard people say, oh, well, I'm immersing myself in culture, I'm interacting with the local people, but very rarely do you stay in a place long enough to generate the type of intimacy that is necessary to get, receive, and then actually take action on the reflections that you would get from a person in the context of what you're creating with a coach, or like on an Adventure Awake trip, you're traveling with a few other individuals who are in the same type of container as you. And so there's a certain level of established trust that has it be that you can get that kind of feedback and process it without it making it about someone else. The trust is essential. Like if I see your blind spots and present them to you in any way, if you don't trust me, you're probably not going to have any interest in what I have to say about what my experience of you is.
Yeah. It was interesting. I think what you said about the reflection of what you are seeing while you travel is a reflection of something about yourself. Could you explain that more, or maybe use an example of what that looks like?
Yeah. So it's the most obvious with human to human interaction. So I'll use as an example from one of my own personal travels. I went to Morocco in 2010. And I had this expectation that Morocco was going to be this really magical journey, because everyone talks about Morocco as like super magical. It's like magic carpets and tagines and, fancy things and honey and whatever. And I went, and that was not at all my experience. I felt very violated by the constant hustle, the sales mechanism, the degradation of women in general, including me. I got my butt slapped while I was in the middle of the Medina and Fez, and no one would communicate with me. None of the other women would make eye contact with me. And I absolutely made that about Morocco. I made Morocco a terrible place. I told every single person I know, this was before I became a coach and learned there might be another way to interpret this experience, but I told everybody that I knew that Morocco was awful and never go back. That was my experience of Morocco. I went with my boyfriend at the time, but effectively as an individual traveler. And of course, hindsight's 2020. I got a lot of tools after that. And I realized that a lot of the experiences that I had, to cry out violation, what was truly happening is that a lot of my fears were being presented to me on that trip. My fear of taking advantage of people, my fear of being too much and too abrasive, my lack of boundaries, my fear of saying no. I had a really, really big fear of saying no. I think a lot of women especially really struggle with this one. And if you want to learn how to say no, definitely go to Morocco and practice it. That is actually a really great place to practice having a boundary. And I absolutely made it about Moroccans. I had a lot of judgment, which prevented me from gaining consciousness in that experience, because I didn't take responsibility for my experience while I was there. There was no way for me, I didn't have the tool. There was no way for me to embrace the reality of what it's like to travel in Morocco. And as a result, I missed out on the magic. I didn't see any of the magic while I was there.
So the tool, what is the tool that when you say that, what does that mean?
In this case, the tool was definitely a sense of, first of all, personal responsibility, which is something that's easiest to learn as it's modeled by someone else, but it's effectively learning how to take responsibility for every experience that you have, effectively a clearing of your own side of the street, so that no matter what happens, maybe you get robbed, maybe you fall off a scooter in Thailand, and you end up in the hospital and have a terrible experience. Those major travel nightmares are often some version of a message for you. I personally don't believe in coincidences and accidents. We often have crazy travel stories and experiences when we're not listening to ourselves, or when there is something that very desperately wants to be made conscious of in our minds. And it's gotten to a point where loud, I call them loud things happen. So accidents, things that will jar us in the same way, some people need to go and get hit by a car in order to change their lives, and other people sign up for an adventure in order to do that, because it has the same impact on us. It gives us a reality shift And that's what I was using travel for. And then, there was obviously plenty that I needed to become conscious of, because as I traveled more extremely, I started having more and more extreme circumstances happening to me. But actually what I realized is that they were happening for me to become more conscious of the areas in which I was, unbeknownst to me, guided by fear. And you really see that stuff quite poignantly when you're on the road.
If a person were to have all the tools that you now have, and then they started traveling, would you not expect them to have any crazy stories then? Would that just be, everything would be a breeze?
Not necessarily. Again, I don't think that our journeys ever fully end. I mean, when I go out and travel, I still have adventures. I went back to Morocco last fall. Hilariously. I actually had a lot of resistance to it. And then I was like, wait a second, this is a perfect opportunity for me to see how Morocco goes the second time around. And sure enough, I arrived in Morocco, and within 10 minutes of walking outside, people were trying to swindle me. And my response to it was completely different, but I absolutely had the same experience. Like the tangible experience of people trying to hustle you is a part of the experience of going to Morocco. But this time I flirted with it, I played with it, and I hustled back. And so it was like I had a lot more confidence. I had a lot more sense of self. I had a boundary. I was very good at saying no this time around because I had practiced it. Like I was clear there. And I really enjoyed the practice of negotiation, letting people try and sell me stuff, people not respecting my no, and me turning that into a game of candid street photography. So every time someone disrespected my no, I would take a picture of them and they would say no photo. And I would say, if you don't respect my no, then how can I respect yours? And I ended up getting some amazing photography of Moroccans literally with their lips pursed saying no to me with their fingers pointed at me while also trying to shove a necklace in my face, So those experiences still happen. I would say that what happens now is I weather the storm quite effortlessly. It doesn't, where I had this, existential crisis in Peru that took me almost 2 years to recover from. Now I don't get traumatized by the experiences. They're truly adventures. They're like, wow, what did we get from this?
Can you talk about what happened at the bus station? Was someone trying to rob you, or?
Okay, well, sort of a long story. The root of the story is that I went on that trip attempting to control things. And I don't know if you've traveled to South America, but that's just a recipe for disaster. Nothing is controllable in South America. I was traveling for a month. I was in Peru. I had been in Ecuador, and I went into the country. This was a sort of a rookie travel mistake. I wasn't even a rookie, so I told myself I should have known better. But I arrived with Danish kroner in cash, expecting that I would be able to convert it at the airport. And sure enough, no one would accept my Danish kroner because it's a fairly rare currency when you think about the world at large. And then none of my bank cards worked when I got there. And so I started my trip that was supposed to be a month long with no access to cash and, a month long of adventures and, guides to pay and activities to do, like going to, I went to the Galapagos and I went all over Ecuador, and then I was in Peru, and basically only one of my credit cards eventually I found a machine for that could give me money. And I was just really limited on money. And by the time I was at high altitude for most of it, I was up in the Andes. And from the first night, I started waking up with gasping for air at around 3:00 in the morning because of the altitude. And that was not something I was expecting. I have asthma, but I didn't really expect that was going to be an altitude experience I was going to have. And so by the time I got to Peru, I had about 18 collective nights of about 2 to 3 hours of sleep disrupted by panic attack, waking up suffocating experiences every single morning. So I was really at this point hanging on a thread. I had no money. None of the plans worked out the way that they were supposed to. And we had gone to Machu Picchu, and the next day we were to take a series of bus rides to get to the border of Bolivia to go to Copacabana, which is just right outside. It's on Lake Titicaca. And every bus in South America leaves at 4:00 in the morning, but actually leaves at 6:00 in the morning because nothing is on time. And I had read on a daily basis horror stories of buses in Peru running off cliffs. And so I was just terrified to get on a bus, but it was the only way that I could travel, given the circumstances that I was in. And we got on this bus that was 2 hours late, knowing that our transfer in Puno, which is on the Peruvian side of Lake Titicaca, should be at 2:00, and we were supposed to arrive there at noon. So we had like this 2-hour window of time. And we're on this bus, and the bus was a chaotic experience. The driver drove like a crazy person. Every time we stopped at a bus rest stop, the bus would like leave without half the bus on it, half of the riders, because like 5 minutes would go by and he would just drive away, and then people would be chasing the bus down the street and all their things were on the bus. Like, so it was just like, I was terrified that I would be stranded without my things if I got off the bus. And so it was like my friend that I was traveling with and I would tag team to go to the bathroom to make sure that we weren't left behind. And then we arrived in this fairly industrial looking town. And when you get to southern Peru, it's kind of like the cocaine capital highway of that part of the world. And there's just lots of shady people. And I unfortunately read a lot of really awful travel horror stories before I left.
Okay.
So I was just like very afraid for my life. And then we got stranded in a town that even the Lonely Planet doesn't write about, which is usually an indicator that it's not a place to stay. It's called Juliaca. And my friend joked, we're here. And I was like, oh God, don't say that. And then the bus driver kicked us off the bus. And they were like, we're not going any further. The roads are closed. You can get a minibus to Puno tomorrow. And I had, a completion of our transfer already planned, a hotel reservation in Copacabana, and the border closed, I think at like 7:00 or something. And so it was just like, I had a sense of urgency and I wanted to get the hell out of this town because it just felt scary to me. And we got off the bus and we were like, okay, what do we do now? And they told us that we might be able to find a ride in this plaza called Plaza Bolognese. And we put our back on our backs and we walked the 13 some odd blocks to get there. And there were no minibuses. And we eventually ended up paying a very shady looking cab driver to drive us on back roads. One person at one point told us to hide our backpacks because we were a target for robbery. And so I was terrified. And so were the 3 people that were with me. There were 2 Japanese people who hardly spoke English and no Spanish, and my friend Nick. And we were just, I think all of us were operating in complete survival mode. Like, we were not present to the experience. We were concerned for our lives. And we paid this guy $60 and he drove us on back roads, not really knowing whether or not he was taking us to where we agreed to go. And I was like taking pictures with my camera and trying to make friendly conversation with him, legitimately concerned that he was going to like strand us in the middle of, this desert, potentially cutting off our limbs. Like I had no concept for what was going to happen, but that was where my mind was. And then we got to the bus station at 2:01 in Puno, and I was ready to like throw myself in front of the bus if it was departing. And we got there and the bus attendant told us that the bus was not departing today and that the next bus was at 9. And I had gone through so much at that point that I lost my shit on her. And I said, I want a refund because I had no money. So I had no cash at all. I had no more Peruvian money. I had no more American dollars. And I needed the $20 to be able to negotiate a ride to the border with someone else. And she said, if you want a refund, you can go back to Cusco and get it where you bought it. And after what I had just been through, it literally felt like the woman slapped me in the face. That was my experience, even though, of course, that wasn't what was really happening. But I was so triggered at that point that it really felt like salt in the wounds. And I crumpled up my bus ticket and I threw it in her face. And I was like, give me my effing money back. And I mean, it was like fury. Fury came pouring out of me. And I did not recognize who that was. I had never experienced that kind of anger before in my life. And I immediately like came to him, was like, what just happened? Like I didn't know what to, I knew it wasn't her. I knew it wasn't my fault either. I didn't know what to do with the energy in my system. Like the fear that had gotten triggered was so profound for me that I didn't know what to do with it. And right as I was about to like try and repair it with her, my friend grabbed me and was like, we got to go. I got us a ride. And we just like, he pulled me off and we got into this bus and they drove us to the border, and then the border ripped us off. He took like 40 of my dollars as I was trying to pay for my visa. And I nearly climbed over the counter and like strangled him. That's how triggered I was. and I didn't recognize this woman. I didn't know who she was. I didn't like, I'm not an angry person is what I kept saying to myself. And so I was in total denial of my experience. And sure enough, what happened is I got sick. I got diarrhea in the Bolivian salt flats. And it didn't go away for a year and a half. I thought I had a parasite. I lost my voice So I didn't have a voice for almost 2 full years after that experience.
Whoa.
Like I was a, professional singer. Like I was in a local professional chamber choir, and I've been singing since I was 4, and I lost my voice. I had this horrible experience. I was emotionally volatile after this experience, and I woke up with panic attacks almost every night for 2 years. Something had been released in me that very badly wanted to be released. Like it needed to come out, and I had no idea what to do with it. And I felt crazy. And that was the first time in my life that I had ever experienced anything like that. And that was ultimately what led me to get coaching training, because I felt I didn't want to be broken, which is what therapy does. And so I went and got coaching training, and I realized very quickly that I had gone out of range, and, I had been on lockdown on my anger my entire life. And of course, as it happens, I had a childhood where I probably experienced a ton of anger, but didn't have an outlet for it. And so I just bottled it up, and I was a happy person instead. And, travel has the possibility of triggering those things in us. We stretch ourselves thin. We go out, the more we travel, the more outside of our comfort zones we're willing to go. And then those sorts of things happen, and they need to be integrated. And ultimately what happened for me is I started meditating. I got coaching. I went through a period where I was in approval of my mess, and then my voice came back. In 6 months of coaching and a lot of personal growth work in my coaching training, my voice came back almost overnight. After doing some work with a shaman in a growth intensive, all of a sudden I could sing again. It was like night and day. Not a
shaman in Peru?
He was a Peruvian shaman.
Oh, wow.
From Cusco. Yeah.
Huh.
We did a rebirthing ceremony, and afterward, he put his hand on my back at the end of that rebirthing ceremony. They wrap you up in a cocoon, and then they beat drums around you, and I guess it breaks up all of your energy, and then you come out, and someone sort of like throws light from a candle on you, and you take a little bit of honey to sweeten the rebirthing experience. And I was very impacted by that. It was as though all of a sudden I could feel a lot of things that I had been trying to not feel for a very long time. And then he put his hand on my back, and it was as though my whole insides just sort of like vacuumed to the side, and I realized how much of a well of love I had in here. And the next morning I could sing again. And over the course of the 6 months prior, my digestive system started to normalize as well. So it was a process of really getting an approval of my emotional experience, which is something that we just don't have the space for. And travel triggers that, and in profound ways, and like beautiful ways. And I want so badly to be able to facilitate those types of experiences for other people, and also to be able to facilitate the healing and growth that comes with it.
So do you think that people feel an urge to travel because they unconsciously have a need to trigger something to bring awareness to it?
Yes. I think that there are inherent seekers in this world that know that there's something more. And I think that most of those people are the ones with passports who are getting on planes going to foreign places. It's our desire to understand other cultures is rooted in our desire to know ourselves better. And those of us who are on that journey are usually on it for some version of self-understanding. Some people take a psychology class, other people get on a plane. But you usually get a basis of understanding of who you are as a person when you compare yourself to other people. And so that's often the case. And in some cases, there are lots of people who travel to get away from that reflection, who go to foreign places and don't necessarily integrate themselves in other cultures. But, it's easy to find novelty in foreign experiences as a means to sort of take a step back from the intensity of the reality that you've created for yourself that isn't necessarily satiating. And then there's this whole other audience of people who've decided to live in that. Like, you're one of those people who's created a nomadic life in a way. There are lots and lots of more people that are doing that, or that are digital nomads. And there's a lot of possibility in that lifestyle of really becoming hugely conscious, or really, really on the opposite end of the polarity, really, really disconnecting from yourself. It just kind of depends on the person. And the communities that you are hanging out with, and the type of training and tools that you have access to. But it can be a profound experience of discovering parts of you that come out. Like, who are you when you go to Bali that you don't access when you're in your hometown.
Mm-hmm.
You're hanging out without a shirt on and relaxed and probably, living a specific quality of life in Bali that you don't have the urge to access or formulate it at home, which is why it's compelling to be there. And we all have that. And one of the things that I teach with my clients is like, yeah, you love standing. I love standing on the edge of cliffs. That is a thrill for me beyond measure. And it's because I love the physical sensation of vastness, of sight, and sort of the on the edge sensation of knowing that if I were to step forward, my life would be over in an instant, and I am choosing this life. I'm choosing not to. I'm choosing to live. And that sensation is something that I have embodied now. So I don't need to sit on the edge of the cliff to have this sensation. And so now sitting on the edge of the cliff feels like peace. And when you embody the physical sensation or the emotional experience sensation or the spiritual sensation of an experience, and you take ownership of it, recognizing that you feel that way because you feel that way, not because the place makes you feel that way, you alter your experience of the place or of the experience. So it shifts it.
That's cool. I knew it. I knew it. You explain things in such a way that is just different than other people explain it. So it could be a cliff, it could be rafting down some rapids, it could be like whatever the experience is that you get. It could be in the market in Morocco. That it's not the place that's causing it. It's you. Yeah. So I'll give you some other references to this that I just find to be like more easily tangible reference points. One second. I just want to make sure I don't miss the pieces of it. But basically we use travel often to escape and to have a sense of freedom. Those are kind of like two main reasons why a lot of people travel. It's like they have the weekend getaway, for example. Mm-hmm. If you think about the ways that people create sort of language around experiences, we use Facebook, for example, to feel connected and comparing ourselves to other people. We use sports to feel a sense of resiliency and strength. Music we use to feel emotion and to express ourselves. We use sex to feel attractive or to feel worthy, or to feel connected. That's another way that we use sex to feel connected. And our personal work is to recognize without attachment that we have access to those experiences. We have access to freedom. We have access to connection. We have access to resiliency, strength, expression, emotional expression, self-worth. All those things exist inside of us. And up until a certain point, we'll use the trigger or the experience to have that experience inside of us. And then there's a point at which we can take ownership of the experience itself, the sensation itself. And then what happens is that the trigger or the experience that triggers that sensation gets to graduate to a whole new level. And so what that happens for Adventure Awake is a prime example. Travel then becomes a journey into the depths of your consciousness. So it's a much more evolved experience than I get to get on a plane and go feel free somewhere. Like it becomes even more esoteric and, whatever, existential than that. So you're not saying that we don't need to have sex or listen to music anymore, that we could have those experiences without the trigger. What you're saying is that the trigger now gives us something deeper?
Yes. So which is much more fulfilling, right? So when we're not using it to this is kind of a chargy way of saying it, but when we're not using it to compensate for something, so when we're not using sex to feel attractive, but we just purely feel attractive, mm-hmm. Sex then becomes so much more than that. It becomes an exploration of the oneness of humankind. It can become also a journey into your consciousness. Like relationship is one of the best ways to experience a reflection of yourself. So sex becomes more powerful. It becomes a more powerful and satiating experience rather than a hungry ghost that we use to feel like we have worth, which is where a lot of people are with sex, as an example. Mm-hmm. For music, music becomes creativity and composition and innovation and a complexity of the layers of which things can be meshed together. There's just so much more available when you really listen to music and you already have a conduit for your emotional experience. It just graduates beyond. Like, we basically can get so much more out of our individual experiences because we're no longer using them to feed into our sense of self-worth.
Wow. So, okay, this is blowing my mind because this happened to me recently in regards to watching movies, where all of a sudden I wasn't just experiencing the story, but I was thinking about how the actors were delivering their lines, or how the director had framed a shot, or how they had chosen a location to create a feeling, and all of these things. Like, when I watch a movie now, I see like the hundreds of thousands of decisions that went into making a scene. Right. And it's just, the whole experience has so much more depth. And I was like, how did this happen? All of a sudden, I'm not just watching a movie anymore. I'm seeing like an entire industry explained in the story.
Exactly. And then like that becomes a trigger for your own individual brilliance to shine. Like, watching movies is powerful. I don't know if my consciousness just became aware of this being in LA. I've been in LA for the past 6 months. And so of course the film industry is fairly prominent here. Mm-hmm. And I occasionally get eyelash extensions, and my lady is an actor. And we have been talking about acting as a means of shadow work. And it's the exact same principle that I use at Adventure Awake. So if you think about playing a role in a film or a TV show or whatever, you are effectively channeling through you an element of your consciousness, whether or not it's conscious. So in order for you to be a successful actor, you have to have access to a fairly broad array of diverse ways of being. Mm-hmm. And the truth of the matter is that we always do have access to a broad range of diverse ways of being, because we have access to a broad range of emotional expression. And the broader and more conscious those things are, the more gifted of an actor you are. So like, think Morgan Freeman, for example. He can play like any role. He's also a fairly evolved human being. He's very conscious. Jim Carrey is the same way. They're both on like serious consciousness journeys. And conversely, if you are trying to play a role and you tap into that way of being, but you're in denial of that being an element of who you are, like Heath Ledger playing Dark Knight, you end up in denial of that element of who you are, but it infiltrates into your psyche inevitably, because you're spending 15 hours a day in that state, in that character, and it can disturb your psyche. And then you need to take painkillers and a variety of other things to like sleep at night, because you don't want to believe that you're capable of that kind of evil. But meanwhile, you're acting evil all day long. And the truth is that we all have access to that kind of evil. It is a part of our realm of humanness. And, our human judgment then obviously makes it possible that we don't make decisions from that place. But our consciousness around it is ultimately what will be the deciding factor of that. And just like you've noticed, like it's like inception upon inception. You watch a film and it's the decisions of just the set of a movie are all an intricacy of choice. And then on top of that, you have all of the actors who are doing their own consciousness journey. Like, I could trip on this for days. They're on their own consciousness journey. And you could literally place that entire model on an Adventure Awake trip, and it is the exact same thing. You have 4 to 6 people who are coming on a trip. They all have identify themselves at. That's their ego. Some are on varying degrees of consciousness and more or less aware of where they show up and how they show up in certain situations. And then you have the platform, which is in Greenland or Mongolia or Namibia or whatever it is. And in that context, certain parts of you are going to show up. In the context of Greenland, we had 4 women, and they all were hilariously different manifestations of really similar belief systems. So a lot of them, all 4 of them were very powerful women, and in varying degrees, some would diminish themselves and hide in order to not take up too much space, and then blame the women who did take up too much space. And the women getting blamed were taking up space because they were afraid of taking up too much space. And so, they created their reality of taking up too much space by taking it up. And then, another one who's afraid of her own power and doesn't want to blow anyone out. And so uses niceties and politeness in her language in order to have that, soften her power and her strength. And so like you see the way that we show up as characters. There's a book called The Untethered Soul that gives really beautiful language to this. But basically, when we recognize that we are looking at the world through a set of lenses and that other people are looking at their world through a set of lenses, travel offers you the opportunity to recognize that we are all coming into the same planet and the same experience with different lenses on. And there's this Buddhist story of these 6 blind men who are led to an elephant, and they're all given a different part of the elephant to touch and feel. And then they all come back and reconvene to discuss their experience of the elephant. And one of the experiences is, the elephant is a gigantic wall, and he was at the belly of the elephant. And the other experience is that he was at the tail of the elephant, and so it was just this rope-like textured experience. And then the other guy's experience was a gigantic plate that was movable and crusty, and that was the ear of the elephant. And then another person's experience was the trunk of the elephant. And they got in this big fight because everybody said, no, you must have not been at an elephant. My experience of the elephant was that it was a wall, or mine was that it was a trunk. And then they came to the conclusion that all of their truths were real and true. And they had all 6 different perspectives of the truth. And that is the power of traveling in community. That's the power of traveling with the blind spot identifier being a coach, is that it is always possible. And no matter how many people you have in the room, there will be hundreds of different perspectives of the exact same experience, because every experience is coded by the lenses through which we're looking. So my walk of life is going to have me experience Bali in a different way than your walk of life is going to have you experience Bali. And there's no way to control that. And the way that we connect as human beings is by sharing those experiences with one another. We expand our perspectives, and we also get to learn how to have empathy for other people to have different experiences than we do. And that's extremely empowering. And I mean, there's a whole variety of things that you can do with that as the context, basically.
Wow. Now I want to come on one of your Adventure Awake trips.
You can come to Namibia.
Namibia? I've never been to Namibia. Antesa, I think we'll probably have to do another interview sometime, because this is really fun. It's fascinating.
I would love.
I love just letting you talk and open my mind. But so let's see. I am going to end with a final question, which is, if you could change or add anything to the world, what would you wish for the world to have?
Gosh, only one thing. I would say, particularly in the Western world, there is currently a lack of compassion for the human experience that keeps us disconnected from one another. There's a way in which, when we don't agree, we withhold love. And it's killing us. I really feel like it is that disconnection is the root of so much of disease, of addiction, of trauma. When we feel confronted, we have this tendency to just walk away or to fight or some other way, not stay connected with one another. And I really believe that I hold a strong vision for that being accessible to everyone, that it is possible to love anyway, it's not love unconditionally, because there's conditions on everything, but just to love anyway, love your mom even though she's crazy, love your dad even though he's harsh, love your siblings for who they are and for what they reflect in you. And there's so much healing to be had there. I see it especially with women, and this is like, we could have a whole other podcast on my feelings towards women. I think I've said this to you actually before, women's empowerment is my jam. I really believe that powerful women rise together. Powerful women are vulnerable. We hold space for one another. And we don't see that often. And I don't like that we make all of our problems about how men have kept us small. And I actually think women keep women small. And we've been doing it for a long time. And I really feel like my voice is in the world to present an alternative perspective, which is that we can rise together. And in women rising with women, men will be able to rise to meet us, and we will heal in ways that we have not been able to for centuries. And that's part of the work of Adventure Awake trips, is that learning how to create space for everyone to have their truth. It's powerful. It's so simple. And we're just not trained to allow people to have their experience, because it's confronting, and we think that challenges our experience. And it's like the blind man with the elephant. Everyone has a true experience of the elephant. It's just different. And I think that the world needs that.
I love that. And I love that that you're saying it's just a matter of being trained and learning some new tools and ways to deal with our experience, because then it's totally fixable. And
absolutely. Emotional intelligence, unlike intellectual intelligence, can be learned. It can be expanded. Intellectual intelligence, you stay fixed your entire life to the same number, though emotional intelligence expands your intellectual intelligence. Your capacity for thought increases the more emotion you have available to you that you're in approval of. And we forget that. And I think that, there's this small percentage of the world who's out seeking, who's out doing personal growth, and who's out trying to find these new ways. And then the other percentage of the world who thinks that they're okay, but actually truly what's happening is that most people have given up on their ability to access the change that they're looking for in their lives, or they're afraid. And I really want to be a model for the fact that, sometimes doing personal growth work is painful. That is a part of the game. Just like growing muscle is painful. Just like learning how to play the piano requires practice. It doesn't happen overnight. We don't get a revival overnight if we want to transform our lives. But to know that it's possible, and to know that there are people out in the world who want to create space for you to be your greatest self, that feels like my mission on this earth, is that we can all be there. It doesn't have to be reserved for a small audience of people who happen to have access. And I work with a lot of people who are doing this kind of work in, underprivileged areas, who are doing trainings with teens and with young people. And that gives me a lot of hope for future generations and for what's to come. Emotional intelligence is a huge keyword these days. It's big. Harvard Business Review writes about it all the time, and companies are starting to do that kind of training with their employees. And I feel really good about where we're headed. I don't see any problems. I see lots and lots of opportunities for us to become more connected, even the ones that are currently showing up as making us disconnected. I think that they're there to highlight just how disconnected we are, so that we can go in the opposite direction and go back to being tribal, community-oriented, connected with one another.
Brilliant. I love it. What a great, compelling vision to have. Antesa, what is the best place for people to find you online?
I'm on Facebook. I love new Facebook friends. If anyone wants to reach out, I also have a website. It's adventureawake.com. That's my Adventure Awake website, obviously. I also have a personal website, which is antesajensen.com. I post regularly on both, on the blogs, pictures from our journeys and videos from our trips are on the Adventure Awake website, and any events that I have coming up are usually posted on one or the other. So those are both good websites to follow and subscribe to email lists and stuff like that. And then on Facebook, follow me on Facebook. If you don't want to be my friend, that's cool too. We have a Instagram. I love the Adventure Awake Instagram page. It makes me happy to go look at. I'm a photographer as well as all these other things. So all of my photography from our trips is on the Instagram page, and quotes that are sort of inspiring. So those are all, the social medias.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a great pleasure. And I just want to acknowledge you for leading the way for people to get triggered and then sort it out. So
it's my absolute pleasure. It's one of my favorite things.
Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very
Antesa.
much. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Dar.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, another great episode with Antesa Jensen. Would love to hear what you got from this episode. Feel free to leave us feedback on Instagram, is somewhere that's easy to connect with me, or on iTunes. We take the reviews on iTunes and They help guide the show, what types of guests are ending up being really valuable for people. So you can help shape the direction of the show, and it also helps keep the show up in the rankings. So double duty if you leave a review and rate the show on iTunes. And again, I want to remind you about Superconductors, which is my book that's coming out July 3rd. There is a lot of amazing stuff there. Even if you went back and listened to every single episode of The Art of Adventure, there would be even more in this book, because I've distilled down from all of those interviews and from hundreds of books and academic journals and personal conversations that I've had over the years of studying business around the world. So a lot of source material went into this book, and I'm really excited that it's coming out. That is all for today's episode. So now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.